Hey, I'm Hunt, and this is Hunt on LSU, your channel for LSU Fighting Tiger football talk. Enjoy the video. We want you to leave a comment below, hit that like button, and subscribe right below the video. Enjoy. And we're going to talk some LSU football to start things off here in the second hour. LSU football's official Twitter handle tweeted out its Freak of the Week this week. They're deep in the throes of their strength and conditioning here in the offseason. And this week's Freak of the Week was Gabe Reliford, freshman defensive lineman from up in the 318 Shreveport Evangel product. And they say he got up to 20.9 miles per hour on the GPS. That is a big man running quite quickly, if I do say so myself. And it got me to thinking about LSU's defensive line, and we all know that it's a concern. Brian Kelly said out loud it was a concern. They certainly looked in the transfer portal hard to try to find some help there, and they've got what they've got at this point, and you've got to make it work. And a lot of people, when discussing LSU's defensive line, will point to some of these freshmen that LSU has brought in that are immensely talented and say, well, they've got this guy and this guy, that they should be okay. They've got Gabe Reliford. He was a high 4-star player. He can play. They've got Dominick McKinley. That's a 5-star. He can play. And so I did what I generally do when that kind of thing pops up, and I thought, I've got some thoughts on that, but why don't I go look it up? And as I tell you all the time, when I look statistics up like this, sometimes it tells the exact story that I thought, and sometimes it tells a different story than maybe I remember. And this time, it's a little different than I remember. It did not work out exactly the way that I thought. In my head, when I think about Gabe Reliford and Dominick McKinley being impact players for this particular team, I think, man, two spots where I do not want to rely on true freshmen is quarterback and defensive front. Like, you got a freshman running back, yep, get him some carries. I think he can handle it. Maybe pass protection's a bit of an issue. Might not have the best hands because he got a bunch of handoffs in high school. But in terms of just running, let's go. You got a wide receiver, even a corner, pass rusher. Like, okay, those guys as freshmen can go in there and can play. But you talk about playing on the inside of defensive line. You talk about 18, 19-year-olds going against 21, 22-year-old men in there. Like, that's not something you want to rely on. And LSU has not relied on true freshman defensive linemen, specifically tackles, very much over the years. And certainly I was not going to go back over every single freshman defensive lineman and all of their statistics for the last 10 years. Like, that's a little bit more than needs to be done. But what I thought is, okay, I'll go to the recruiting page and I'll find, going back through every class for about 10 years, some really productive LSU players and some really highly thought of recruits. Some of those line up in there both. Some of them are either or. You got some 5-stars that weren't quite what you thought. You got some 4-stars that became better than you thought. You got some 3-stars as well that became better than you thought. So I'll just take the really productive players, and you'll see. I'll go through the names. You'll get it. And some of the highly thought of recruits. What did they do as freshmen? And keep in mind, with running backs, like, the statistics pretty much do tell the story. How many yards did you run for? How many catches did you make? How many touchdowns did you score? That's kind of how you would measure a running back. With defensive linemen, statistics don't tell the whole story. I know that. You don't know. You know that. Just because you don't have a bunch of tackles doesn't mean you weren't disruptive, doesn't mean you didn't command a double team, doesn't mean you didn't hold your line so a linebacker can make a play. There are a lot of things you can do on the interior defensive line that don't necessarily speak to statistics, but that's all I got. I can't go through all the tape for 15 guys in their entire freshman year. So we're going to go off statistics and just kind of paint the picture that way and see just how much LSU can expect from defensive linemen. We start all the way back in 2011. Anthony Johnson was as highly touted a defensive lineman as LSU has ever brought in. He was a top 10 player in the country, top 5 player in the country by some. He was the national sacks leader. He was nicknamed the Freak. Like, in that 2011 class that featured Jarvis Landry and Odell Beckham and Jeremy Hill and Kenny Hilliard and Lael Collins and Trey Turner and all those guys, he was the defensive lineman. And that team in 2011 was obviously loaded. Michael Brockers and Benny Logan started on that phenomenal defense. Josh Downs played a good bit. And Anthony Johnson made 12 tackles that year, 3 tackles for loss and a sack and a half. He wasn't asked to do a ton, but he did make a tackle a game, basically. Fast forward a couple of years, Christian Lockett was asked to do a ton because Freak Johnson left and Ego Ferguson was going. Like, they didn't have enough dudes on the interior, and Christian Lockett had to play a ton. And he made 11 tackles, had a tackle and a half for loss, and a sack. Like, statistically speaking, in 13 games, he didn't do much statistically. But you keep moving forward. Davin Godchaux was a star at LSU, but has become a stalwart in the NFL. And he started 10 games as a true freshman. He made 42 tackles as a true freshman. That is a massive amount for a defensive lineman. Only 1.5 tackles for loss and no sacks. But, like, that's real production from a young player there. The next year in 2015, and this is going out towards the edge, and I get it, and it's a different deal, but Arden Key came in and was fan-freaking-tastic. 41 tackles, 6.5 TFLs, 5 sacks, started 9 games. Like, Davin Godchaux and Arden Key were big pieces to a defense as true freshmen. Rashard Lawrence was a highly, highly thought-of recruit. He was a true freshman in 2016. 6 tackles, 1 TFL, 1 sack. Not a lot from Rashard Lawrence. Apu Ika, 2019. Pretty highly thought of recruit. Went on to do great things at Baylor. Was a big-time player in the Big 12. On that 2019 team, they blew a lot of teams out, so you got some mop-up time. He made 17 tackles, had a tackle and a half for loss, like about a tackle and a half per game for Apu Ika. Jaquelin Roy came in 2020. He didn't play as many games in that year. 18 tackles, had 4 TFLs, 2 sacks, like 2 tackles a game for him, and was in the backfield a little bit. You saw some real flashes late from him. You saw him a lot in that Florida game in the fog. But he did a little bit. Mason Smith, huge recruit. 19 tackles, 5 TFLs, 4 sacks. He actually started 4 games that year. So what I'm getting at here is, and I'll continue to go through, but we actually got one more, Deshaun Womack last year. 13 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, 1.5 sacks. It's a little bit of a mixed bag, but in my head, like, freshman defensive linemen don't really do anything. You can count on them for maybe like a tackle a game, 2 tackles a game. Probably a lot of that in mop-up time when you're beating some Sun Belt or SWAC team by 40. They're out there, they get 4 tackles that game, and that's 40% of their production for the year. But you have seen 4 sacks from Mason Smith, 42 tackles from Davin Godchaux, 41 tackles from Arden Key. And I don't lay these stats out there to suggest that you need Dominick McKinley and Gabe Reliford to be stars on this team. What really needs to happen is you need Jacobian Guillory and Jalen Lee and Sean Washington and some of these older guys to Paris Shand and some of the guys you're going to bring in to be better than they have been in their career. But I'll allot for some belief that these 2 true freshmen, Reliford and McKinley, maybe one of them is Davin Godchaux. And he does make 42 stops. Maybe he can be disruptive like Jaquelin Roy was late in his freshman year and make a couple of big plays. And that's a different mindset than I had when I started this research at 8 o'clock this morning, kind of going through some of this stuff. Most of the guys didn't do a ton. But in my head, just that doesn't happen. And the fact is that it can. You just don't want to rely on it. And that's why they wanted to go in the transfer portal. That's why they wanted to find a starter or 2, a veteran or 2 that could come in and take some off these freshmen's plate. But I will tell you this. Freshmen enter collegiate athletics, whether it's basketball, baseball, football, softball, whatever the case may be, they enter collegiate athletics more prepared today than they ever have. Defensive, offensive linemen in the 80s and early 90s were redshirting, period. You got to get in the weight room, you're skinny, you got to grow up. Now these guys are in strength programs when they're in 7th, 8th grade. These guys enroll into college Christmas as their senior year of high school. These guys are more prepared than they've ever been. So I'll hold out hope that LSU can get quality snaps from young defensive linemen. If that doesn't happen, I won't be stunned. That's not the expectation, but it could be the reality. We'll just have to see. But it sounds like the offseason's going really well for Gabe Reliford, and we know how big a talent he is. We thought that LSU had lost one to Texas A&M there. They fired Jimbo Fisher. All of a sudden, things start to shake up, and LSU ends up with the home state guys. And hopefully those guys can really play, because I think LSU's going to maybe lean on them a little bit more than we like coming up this fall. If you're looking for LSU football content, you can always find it on our LSU YouTube channel, Hunt on LSU. Invite you to subscribe to that channel and get our LSU football content sent right to your homepage each and every day. We're getting close to SEC Media Days, getting closer to fall camp than we were. Kind of a holiday week next week, then all of a sudden Media Days is a week away, and then all of a sudden fall camp's right there around the corner, and we'll be there for any and all of that. Hey, thanks for watching Hunt on LSU. Before you get out of here, do us a couple of favors. Hit that like button, leave your comments below, and subscribe to the channel for all your Fighting Tiger football talk. See you next time.